Part 3, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, released in 1999. Every now and then I'll hear someone complain that Resident Evil 4 turned the Resident Evil franchise from thoughtful survival horror into a full-on action series. Obviously those fuckers have never played Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, because in Nemesis, Jill Valentine returns with a refined arsenal, an expanded moveset, and an outfit stolen from a $1 per poke meth-addicted prostitute. Honestly, Jill looks less like she needs to worry about coming down with the T-virus than the zombies need to worry about contracting the AIDS virus from biting her. Jill is also inexplicably a ginger this time around, which I can only assume was intended to make the game spookier. Survival, or more specifically item management, is less of a concern in Nemesis than it was in its predecessors due to the sheer amount of ammunition and healing items scattered around the map. However, the locations and sets of items found in Nemesis are partially randomized. Odds are, when most players enter the STARS office in the police station, they'll find the somewhat powerful Magnum in a locker. If the player uses the gunpowder scrounged in the preceding areas to create grenade rounds, the extremely powerful grenade launcher is near guaranteed to appear in the locker instead. No matter which item is found, its counterpart appears later in another fixed location. Enemy hordes are also pulled randomly from a pool of possible scenarios, and often clearing an area of one mob will cause the other option to spawn during a later return. This keeps the sense of danger active at all times and prevents the player from knowing exactly what to do every time they enter a familiar location. While Resident Evil 3 focuses on just a few enemy types, the variety of character models within the subgroups are particularly impressive. Jill faces off against 2 varieties of hunters, literally dozens of unique zombies, and even the titular Nemesis has varying loadouts depending on how you play. Difficulty-wise, Resident Evil 3 has a hard mode and an easy mode with no in between. I cannot vouch for the merits of easy mode since even as a kid I refused to play it. In hard mode, like some Aspergian perverts pocket watch themed persona, enemies take a dicking and keep on ticking. Most of the time you'll want to just run past them, which is easier said than done since most enemies want to grab Jill and hold her tight just as much as the rest of us. The Nemesis appears often and takes gigantic stockpiles of ammo to drop should you choose to fight him. However, since you are playing on hard mode, the Nemesis also drops extremely powerful gear like an improved pistol that fires incredibly fast, a sawed-off shotgun with improved stopping power, and containers that compact 3 health sprays into a single item slot. The drops make for great rewards, save for when they arbitrarily don't drop because the game is hardwired to expect you to run away. It's pretty annoying to fight the Nemesis twice in a row, only to find that you didn't get an item drop from the second fight, and that you've blown your stockpile of ammunition for nothing. The reloading tool completely flips the ammunition management system of the franchise on its head, making the components of ammunition intended for weaker weapons viable components for more powerful ammunition instead. Expert players will skip the shotguns available in Nemesis entirely, utilizing their class of gunpowder to craft freeze and flame rounds for the grenade launcher instead. My only complaint about this system is that you cannot break down unwanted ammunition that is already assembled into its component gunpowders. This would have added further utility to the reloading tool and made item management a great deal easier. As competent as the music and the sound design on Resident Evil 3, the level design is an absolute clusterfuck that makes no sense. I don't know who the dickhead engineer is that made it impossible to enter City Hall without a pocket full of crystals, but I'm glad that fucker's city got destroyed. Imagine having to look around a concrete dictionary, 8 gems, a pipe wrench, and a crank every time you want to go into City Hall for work. As much as I praised Silent Hill for having a lived-in feel, where every building has kitchens, bathrooms, and appropriate furnishings, the areas of Raccoon City flow from one to another without any semblance of logical utility. Why exactly does this diner store their meat in a flooded basement that can only be reached by a ladder? Why the fuck is the only gas station in town located at the end of a street too narrow for cars to pass through? At times, Resident Evil 3 almost feels like a larger game was planned, canned, and its completed components mushed together like the faces of multiple pugs in a trash compactor. Nemesis also continues the original PlayStation series' proud tradition of god-awful voice acting, terrible dialogue, and spastic Italian-American with Parkinson-styled hand-jiving during conversations. Glue a knife to Jill's hand and she could carve Nemesis up like a Christmas goose just by talking to it. Which brings me to the titular character of Resident Evil 3, the Nemesis. The Nemesis punches women in the face, and I can appreciate that, but for a guy specifically designed to kill Jill, he spends an awful lot of time not killing her. Often, all you have to do to escape him is walk down a staircase or pass through a flimsy door that he could easily bust open. Sure, there are a few situations where he actively pursues Jill from room to room, but those are scripted, and even then you can still easily escape. Why he doesn't just use his tentacle arm to punch Jill directly in the cunt where her defenses are the weakest is beyond me. Perhaps he just doesn't want his fingers to stink of Jill's ginge-tinged minge. Completing the main campaign unlocks Mercenaries mode, which tasks the player with rescuing a set number of survivors in a given area in a certain amount of time. The 3 player characters all have wildly different loadouts, but play in identical areas with identical enemies, the only functional difference being that if you want to earn money quick, you'll use Mikhail's gear to rack up kills, and if you want an exercise in futility, you can knife enemies to death as Nikolai instead. Successfully completing Mercenaries mode unlocks items for the single player mode, but since you have to be single player in order to unlock Mercenaries mode, the unlockables seem a little bit pointless for anyone who already beat the game on hard. Overall, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is an old, but not dated game that's worth checking out. Between unlockables, quick time selection events, the challenge of confronting Nemesis more often, randomized enemies, the various strategies for utilizing gunpowder, Mercs mode, and the competency of the core gameplay, Resident Evil 3 is an extremely enjoyable and replayable game.